The flight vest smells faintly of old canvas and camphor when Dr. Evelyn Park lifts it from the box, the fabric stiff where sweat once dried. Inside, stitched by hand, are initials meant to belong to Daniel George Dawson, missing since 1944. Pinned to the lining is a yellowed scrap of paper. Returned alive, not his. No name, no date. On a crackling archive tape, Daniel's brother, Donald Dawson, says quietly, "They told me this was proof. You can hear him swallow. I can't pretend I know what it feels like to hold an object that promises an ending and threatens to take it away. This vest is touchable. The truth inside it is not. The airfield was never quiet, even when it pretended to sleep. Before sunrise, the place already carried a sound that got into your teeth. A distant generator chugging, rain ticking on corrugated tin. A mechanic's wrench dropped and recovered with a hissed apology. A sweet rot jungle smell drifted in from beyond the perimeter. Wet leaves, mud, and something like bruised fruit. The monsoon had backed off for a few hours, not out of mercy, but because weather here behaved like a man who refused to explain himself. First Lieutenant Daniel George Dawson woke the same way he always did, eyes open, body still, as if he'd been listening all night. 26. The responsible one, the oldest son from a foggy coast town, where mornings were gray and the ocean taught you to live with bad visibility. His cot was tucked into a corner of a canvas-walled hut, close enough to the entrance that he could get out without stepping on anyone. He sat up and immediately reached for his pocket notebook. The notebook was small enough to disappear in a palm, the cover softened by sweat and handling. Inside were drawings of cloud shapes cumulus, like piled laundry, thin streaks like pencil marks, heavy bellies that meant turbulence. Daniel always wrote the date at the top of each new page. Always. Even when the page stayed blank. He pulled a stubby pencil from the spine, licked the tip like he'd done since school, and wrote the date in careful print. Then he paused, listening to the rain. On the crate that served as a bedside table sat a tin of cinnamon gum. He'd found it in his supply shipment months earlier, some stateside kindness that had no business surviving the tropics. Daniel unwrapped a piece and chewed slowly. The taste was sharp and sweet at the same time, the kind of artificial warmth that made you think of Christmas kitchens back home. "It keeps the nausea down," he told people when they joked about it. He didn't tell them the other reason. The gum gave him something to do with his mouth, so he wouldn't grind his teeth during takeoff. A torn flight glove lay beside the gum tin. Thumb seam split. Daniel held it up to the weak light and did the small repair he'd been putting off. He threaded dental floss through the eye of a needle floss, was tougher than thread, and it didn't rot as fast in this humidity. His fingers worked automatically, the way they had when he and his brother Donald patched their father's cracked skiff hull back home. Tar-black hands, a laugh that came out in the wrong place. The stubborn pride of saying, "Still floats." Daniel tied off the last stitch, tugged it twice, satisfied. The act felt ordinary, and ordinary was precious. Ordinary was a kind of armor. Outside, boots squelched through mud. Someone called for coffee. Someone else coughed, like the jungle had crawled into his throat. Daniel reached under his shirt and touched the silver ring that hung on a cord against his chest. He kept it off his finger in the cockpit metal, on skin could snag, and he'd seen what snagging did in a hard landing. The ring was warm from his body. He pulled it out, held it between thumb and forefinger, and tapped it twice against the notebook cover. A private ritual. Tap, tap, like knocking on wood. Then he tucked it back under his shirt and stood, rolling his shoulders until his joints cracked. At the edge of camp, the runway was a strip of stubborn earth, carved out of jungle that always tried to reclaim it. The reconnaissance aircraft sat in a row like wary birds, their skin beaded with rain. Ground crew moved around them with the slow confidence of men who had learned not to rush anything that could kill you. In the operations shack, a fan pushed hot air in circles without cooling it. Maps were pinned to walls, edges curling. A radio sat in the corner, the speaker occasionally spitting static like someone clearing their throat. Captain Harold Hap Mercer stood over a table, jaw tight, as he scanned the day's flight board. 34, married, with a son he'd never met in person. He looked too clean for this place, because he forced it. He shaved twice a day, even out here, even when the water ran brown and the mirror was just a piece of metal polished to a dull shine. He said it kept him human. It also kept him controlled. Mercer's tiny brass compass lay on the table beside the paperwork, the kind that fit in a watch pocket. It had belonged to his father. He touched it without thinking, thumb on the lid, as if he could feel direction through brass. When Daniel stepped inside, Mercer looked up fast, too fast, like he'd been waiting for him. "You're early," Mercer said. Daniel shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." Mercer studied him. Daniel's face was calm, but calm could mean different things. Calm could mean confidence. Calm could mean resignation. Mercer had learned the difference in ways he wished he hadn't. Daniel leaned forward to see the map grid on the table. Pencil marks cut across it 3 letters and 2 numbers, a route that looked routine if you didn't stare too long. Mercer cleared his throat. "Dawson, I can swap you." Daniel didn't answer right away. He reached for the coffee mug someone had abandoned on the edge of the table. It was cold. He drank anyway, making a face at the bitterness. Mercer pushed. "I'm serious. I'll take it. You can take my desk for a day. I'll even let you mess up my carbon copies." That was Mercer trying to joke. He'd been retyping the same missing person report the week before because the carbon copy smudged, and he'd sworn under his breath the whole time. Even joking, the guilt sat on him like a wet blanket. Daniel finally looked up. "No, just that. No argument, no explanation." Mercer's eyes narrowed. "Why not?" Daniel smiled, barely. "Because you're operations. You don't disappear. You stay here and write letters." Mercer flinched at the word letters. He hated condolence letters. He hated the way his hand shook when he wrote them. He hated how his brain tried to make the sentences clean and respectful when grief was neither. "You don't disappear unless someone wants you to," Mercer said. And he heard his own voice sharp, bitter, like a thing he'd promised himself not to say out loud. Daniel's smile faded. He didn't argue. He just stared at the map for a beat too long, as if memorizing it for another version of the day where he needed it. A mechanic knocked on the doorframe. "Sir, aircraft's fueled. Ready when you are." Mercer nodded, then leaned closer to Daniel. His voice dropped. "Hap to Danny, tell me what's wrong." It wasn't an order. It was a friend asking, almost pleading, without wanting to admit it. Daniel's fingers went to the cord at his chest. He didn't pull the ring out, but he touched it. Tap wasn't possible through fabric, but the pressure was there. "Nothing's wrong," Daniel said. "Just, if I don't land, there's something." Mercer's stomach tightened. "What are you talking about?" Daniel stepped around the table, opened Mercer's desk drawer with a familiarity that came from long days and short patience, and slid a sealed envelope inside. On the front, in neat handwriting, "If I don't land." Mercer stared at it like it was an insect that might jump. "You wrote that before a routine flight?" Mercer said. Daniel shrugged again, too casual. "Routine flights are how it gets you. I have to resin." "Rate? In resin?" Mercer wanted to grab Daniel by the shoulders and shake him, to force the shape of his worry into words he could fight. Instead, he did what officers did. He nodded, stiff and contained, as if acknowledgement was protection. Outside, the air had thickened with heat as the rain eased. Steam rose from the ground. Men wiped their faces with sleeves and laughed about nothing, because laughing was easier than thinking. Daniel walked toward the aircraft, chewing cinnamon gum with slow precision. Each step sank slightly into mud, the soles of his boots pulling free with a wet sound. Near the wing, he stopped to check the glove he'd stitched. He slid it on, flexed his fingers, satisfied the seam held. A crew chief handed him his headset. "Radio's been finicky," the man said. "But she'll talk." Daniel nodded. "She always does." He climbed into the cockpit with practiced movements, careful not to snag the cord around his neck. The silver ring pressed against his stern reveals cold for a second before his body warmed it again. Mercer stood at the edge of the runway, with his hands behind his back, the brass compass in his pocket like a worry stone. He watched Daniel settle in, watched the mechanic pull the chocks, watched the prop spin into life. For a moment, the engine roar filled everything. It shook the air, shook the ribs, shook loose whatever thoughts you'd been holding too tightly. Daniel lifted 2 fingers from the cockpit in a small wave. Not dramatic, not final, just acknowledgement. Mercer raised his hand in return, and he heard himself say, too softly to be heard over the engine, "Come back." Daniel couldn't hear that, but Mercer said it anyway, because saying it felt like doing something. The aircraft rolled forward, gathered speed, and lifted into the damp morning, climbing toward a sky that looked like it couldn't decide whether to open or close. As Daniel's plane became a smaller shape against the clouds, Mercer's mind flicked, involuntarily, to a line he'd heard Daniel say once, half joke, half promise about his brother back home. "If I don't come back by Sunday," Daniel had told Donald, laughing as they patched the skiff, "you still go fishing." Mercer watched the aircraft disappear into the haze and felt the sentence land in him like a stone. Sunday was only a few days away. Sunday was supposed to be simple, a calendar square, a routine. Out here, routine was the first thing the jungle ate. Before Mercer turned back to the operations shack, he reached into his pocket, flipped open the brass compass, and stared at the needle. It trembled, then steadied, pointing with indifferent certainty. Mercer closed it again, and for the first time that morning he realized his face was wet, not from rain, but from sweat that felt suddenly cold. He told himself Daniel would radio in soon. He told himself the envelope in his drawer was just Daniel being cautious, like the dental floss stitching, like the cinnamon gum, like the date written on a blank page. He told himself 100 small comforts, and then he went back inside, because there were flight orders to file, and men to brief, and a day to keep moving, whether or not one man returned to it. The radio did not scream. It did not crackle with panic. It did not deliver the kind of final words that movies train people to expect. It simply never spoke again. At first, that felt temporary. Radios failed all the time out here. Humidity crept into wires, heat softened solder. Insects found their way into places insects should not survive. Captain Hap Mercer stood in the operations shack with one hand on the desk, listening to static breathe in and out, telling himself the same thing every officer told himself in the first hour. Give it time. The jungle beyond the perimeter steamed as the sun climbed. A mechanic wiped his neck with an oily rag. Someone dealt cards on an ammo crate. The slap of cardboard oddly loud. Routine tried to assert itself, the way it always did after takeoff, as if motion itself could guarantee return. Mercer checked his watch. Then again. Then again. "Call sign still hasn't checked in?" a lieutenant asked from the doorway. Mercer shook his head. "Give it 10 more minutes." 10 minutes passed. Then 10 more. The radio stayed indifferent. By midday, Mercer's jaw ached from clenching. He sat down at his desk and pulled the missing aircrew report form from a stack, the paper thin and already damp at the edges. He hated the weight of it in his hands, the way it felt too light for what it represented. He began to type. Aircraft failed to return from routine reconnaissance mission. The typewriter keys struck hard, the sound sharp and final. He paused, fingers hovering, then backspaced. Probable mechanical failure. No. He struck it out. Cause undetermined. That was cleaner. That was safer. That was how the language started to slide away from people. Outside, the search planes lifted off too, then another sweeping grids that looked decisive on paper and meaningless from the air. No smoke was seen. No wreckage. No parachute caught in trees. The jungle swallowed sight the way water swallowed sound. By nightfall, the flights returned with nothing to show, but fuel gauges dipping low and faces set hard with disappointment. Mercer retyped the report because the carbon copy smudged when his hand shook. He swore under his breath, wiped his forehead, and did it again, slower this time. He shaved before bed, scraping his skin raw because stopping would mean thinking. He did not open the desk drawer. The envelope labeled "If I Don't Land" stayed where Daniel Dawson had placed it, white and accusing. Thousands of miles away, Donald Ray Dawson sat at a kitchen table with his mother, Ruth, the morning light slanting through lace curtains she refused to replace. A kettle whistled on the stove. Eggs cooled on plates. Donald counted his steps from the sink to the table 10, 20, 30 before sitting. He'd been doing that more lately. The numbers away to keep his thoughts in line. Ruth folded her hands, knuckles swollen from years of sewing and scrubbing. She had sewn name tags into Daniel's clothes before he shipped out, whispering, "So they can always find you." It was a habit she'd learned after Donald's father was lost at sea. No body, no marker, just water and time. The knock at the door came between bites. Donald stood too fast, chair legs scraping. His stomach tightened. He opened the door and saw the telegram boy, hat in hand, eyes already apologetic. The yellow envelope felt heavier than it should have. Donald didn't open it right away. He stared at his mother, who knew before he spoke. Mothers learn the look. "It says, Donald began, then stopped. His mouth had gone dry. Ruth reached for the envelope with steady fingers and unfolded the paper. Her lips moved as she read, then pressed together. "Missing," she said finally. "Not dead. Not alive." A word that stretched. Donald felt something inside him recoil. He heard his own voice, sharper than he intended. "What does that mean?" Ruth shook her head. "It means they don't know." He wanted to tear the paper in half. Instead, he folded it carefully, then again, until the creases grew white. He slid it into a matchbook sleeve with Daniel's last letter, the paper soft from being unfolded and refolded 100 times. "I can't bury another empty box," Donald said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Ruth looked at the table, at the untouched eggs. She pushed her plate away. That night, she set a third place at the table. Just once that week, then again the next. A clean fork, a folded napkin. She stopped when the neighbors began to stare, when the silence at the table grew louder than conversation. Back at the airfield, Mercer filed updates that said very little and meant too much. No recovery possible. Search suspended due to weather. Presumed lost. Each phrase felt like a decision disguised as fact. He wrote a letter to Ruth Dawson, then tore it up. He started again, hands shaking. "Your son served with distinction." He crumpled that too. In the end, the official language went out, instead typed, stamped, and sent by men who would never hear Ruth's breath catch or see Donald stop eating eggs because breakfast had become dangerous. Mercer kept his own log, separate from the official one. In it, he wrote details that did not belong anywhere else. The time Daniel lifted off, the way the clouds closed faster than forecast, the uneasy calm that had settled over the shack that morning. One line he crossed out 3 times, pressing the pencil so hard it tore the page. He didn't sound surprised. The weeks dragged on. Search flights dwindled. Attention shifted. Another name replaced Daniel's on the board. War did not pause for one man's disappearance. Donald refused to let the word missing settle. He wrote letters. He called offices. He sold his car and wrote down every serial number, as if control could be summoned through documentation. When the answers came back thin and final, he broke a promise he'd made to his mother. "I have to go," he told her, standing in the doorway with his coat already on. Ruth didn't argue. She pressed Daniel's letter into his hand, the paper worn at the folds. "Just come back," she said. It was not a command. It was a hope that already knew better. When Donald arrived overseas, the air felt heavier than it should have, thick with rot and heat. An interpreter named Colette Emberger met him at a dusty office where fans rattled and did little else. She was efficient, quiet, her notebook always in hand. They moved through villages that blurred together, tin roofs, dirt floors, children watching with open curiosity. Donald asked the same questions over and over, his voice hoarse, his patience thinning. "Did you see a plane come down? Did anyone survive? Where did they bury him?" Sometimes there were answers. Sometimes there were shrugs. Sometimes there was laughter that felt wrong, sharp at the edges. One afternoon, a man produced a flight vest. Canvas, faded, smelling of smoke and age. He held it out like an offering. "This," Colette translated. "He says this belonged to the pilot." Donald's hands trembled as he took it. He looked for Daniel's name, his initials, anything familiar. He didn't see them. "They said he was buried," Donald said later. His voice recorded, brittle, but they wouldn't say where. The vest became proof because Donald needed something to end the asking. Because fear had crept in not of dying, but of searching forever and finding nothing again. Back at the airfield, Mercer received word that the case was being closed. He stood at his desk, the drawer still unopened, and felt the weight of it settle. "You did what you could," a superior officer said, not unkindly. Mercer nodded, because that was expected. "I can't pretend I know what it's like to be handed language that erases a person while insisting it's neutral. But I can see what it did to the people who held it." Missing became a stopping point, a way to end effort without ending grief. Mercer slid the file into storage. Donald folded the vest and carried it home. Ruth cleared the extra place at the table. The war moved on, and Daniel Dawson became paperwork still present, still unresolved, still shaping the lives that waited for him to return to a day that no longer existed. The box was smaller than Dr. Evelyn Park expected. It sat on the steel table in the archive processing room, a plain cardboard cube with a private collector's handwriting scrawled across the top in fading ink. The room smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant, a neutral scent meant to suggest order. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady and uncaring. Evelyn set her coffee down already cold, the way it always was by the time she remembered it and pulled on gloves. She labeled the box twice before opening it, once by date, once by location. It was a habit she couldn't break. Order didn't guarantee truth, but it slowed the panic. Inside, folded carefully, was the flight vest. Canvas, stiff with age. The edges were darkened where hands had grabbed it, where sweat and smoke had soaked in and never quite left. When Evelyn lifted it, a fine grit of dust fell to the table. The vest carried weight, not just physical but emotional, the way objects that once mattered to someone always did. She checked the interior first. People always did. Fingers traced the lining until they found the hand-stitched initials, D.G. D. Uneven, faded, but legible. Pinned, just below them, was the note. Returned alive. Not his. No signature. No explanation. The paper was brittle. The pin rusted just enough to stain the fabric. Evelyn felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the moment when a case announced it would not behave. A file isn't a person, she murmured to herself, echoing something she'd said to her daughter 100 times. But it's what we have left. She photographed the vest, the note, the pin, logging each image with careful precision. Then, she turned to the brittle inventory tag, attached to one strap. The serial number was incomplete, the last digits rubbed away by time or handling. Enough to tease, not enough to confirm. Evelyn leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. She could feel the hum of the building through the soles of her shoes, the controlled climate pushing against the wild heat she'd left behind on her last field trip. Her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter, Mina. "Did you find any ghosts today?" Evelyn smiled despite herself. "Not ghosts," she typed back, "just questions." The chain of custody took weeks to reconstruct. The vest had passed through a private estate sale, mislabeled as MISC, gear. It had been stored in a veteran's trunk alongside medals that didn't match, letters written in different hands, a child's drawing folded into a pocket like a bookmark. Evelyn spread the documents across her desk, the paper whispering as she moved it. She followed the vest backward through hands and years, each transfer a small act of forgetting. One photograph stopped her. The image was grainy, black and white. A man stood in the center, holding a vest. His shoulders were hunched, his face hollowed out by something deeper than fatigue. Around him, reporters leaned in, notebooks poised. The caption read, "Brother receives confirmation." Evelyn stared at the name beneath it, Donald Dawson. She pulled the archival audio next, slipping on headphones that pressed uncomfortably against her ears. The tape crackled, the sound uneven, as if the past itself was resisting being played. Donald's voice emerged, older than the man in the photograph, but still tight with remembered strain. "They gave it to me," he said. Said it was his. A pause. Breathing. "I never saw Danny's name inside it." Evelyn stopped the tape and rewound. She listened again, watching the waveform spike and dip on her screen. Donald's voice did not waver when he said it. There was no hesitation, no correction. She wrote it down anyway, underlining the sentence once, then again. Never saw his name. That afternoon, she met with a colleague who specialized in wartime propaganda artifacts. They sat at a narrow table, the vest between them like a third presence. "Could it be staged?" the colleague asked, careful with the fabric. "Could be," Evelyn said. "Could be genuine but reassigned. Could be something meant to end a story." The colleague nodded. Sometimes proof is less about truth than timing. Evelyn thought of Donald, thinner in the second photograph she'd found one taken months later, overseas. In it, he stood beside a woman, both of them looking just past the camera. The woman's name, written on the back in pencil, Colette Emberger. Evelyn tracked Colette next. Records were sparse. An interpreter, European. Attached to a civilian liaison unit for a limited period. No personal file beyond the basics. She found an archived interview with Donald, recorded late in his life. The audio quality was poor, but his words were clear. "I wanted it to be over," he said. I wanted to bring something home. Evelyn felt the weight of that admission settle. She'd heard it before, in different voices, across different cases. The human need for an ending was powerful, powerful enough to accept the wrong one. She pulled the map grid from the vest's pocket next. Pencil marks, smudged but visible. 3 letters, 2 numbers. It didn't match the official crash report. Not exactly. Close enough to be comforting. Wrong enough to matter. That night, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table long after Mina had gone to bed. Papers spread around her, the vest folded neatly on a clean cloth. She sipped reheated coffee and listened again to the static-heavy radio recording from the day Daniel disappeared, mouthing the bursts of noise she'd memorized. Her daughter appeared in the doorway, hair mussed, eyes half closed. "You're still working." Evelyn nodded. "Go back to sleep." Mina lingered. "Do they become ghosts if nobody finds them?" The question landed softly, but it stayed. "I don't know," Evelyn said honestly. "I think they become heavy." End quote. "Is the redder asked?" After Mina returned to bed, Evelyn stared at the vest, at the note pinned inside. Someone had taken the time to write those words. Someone had decided they mattered enough to hide. She felt a familiar pull, the shift from cataloging to investigation. This was no longer about confirming a crash site. It was about understanding a choice. The next morning, she logged a new working title in the case file. Dawson. Daniel G. Status unresolved. She added a second line beneath it, something she rarely did. Artifact credibility in question. Before closing the file for the day, Evelyn touched the vest one more time, her gloved fingers tracing the edge where a hand had once grabbed hold in fear or hope. She imagined Donald holding it, surrounded by reporters, trying to believe that fabric could carry finality. "I can't pretend I know what it's like to inherit someone else's ending and realize it might be a lie. But I can see how that realization sharpens everything that comes after." Evelyn turned off the lights in her office, leaving the vest in the dark. It did not feel like putting something away. It felt like waking it up. The lab was colder than the archive, the kind of cold that crept through the soles of your shoes and settled in your calves. Dr. Evelyn Park liked it that way. Cold slowed people down. Cold forced attention. The flight vest lay flat beneath the lights, its canvas dulled by decades of handling. A technician adjusted the lamp angle, and the fabric's weave came alive, tiny ridges, wear patterns, places where fingers had worried at the seams. Evelyn stood with her hands clasped behind her back, breathing through her nose. She'd learned early not to touch first. Touching too soon turned objects into comfort. She needed them to be honest. "Model's off," the technician said, peering through a magnifier. "Not wrong, just not right." Evelyn leaned in. "Explain." "This vest was produced through a different supply chain than Dawson's unit, used in 1944, he said. "The cut's similar, but the stitching pattern? That's from a base tailor 2 regions south." He tapped the table lightly. "Once, twice. Could have been reassigned. Could have been picked up later. Could have been staged," Evelyn said. The technician didn't argue. They moved to the initials next. D, G, D. Looked convincing at a glance. Thread darkened with age. Edges softened. Under magnification, though, the truth fractured. "One set's older," the technician said. "The threads degraded in a way that matches the canvas. The other set was added later. Different hand, shakier." Evelyn felt the familiar pressure build behind her eyes. She closed them briefly, then opened them again. "Someone wanted it to look right," she said. "Yes." They ran ink testing on the pin note next. The paper aged appropriately. The ink did not. It was newer than the vest, newer than the war. Returned alive, not his. A sentence written with intention, then hidden. Evelyn logged the results, her handwriting precise, despite the weight settling in her chest. The early assumption, the one everyone made, the one that allowed grief to close, was collapsing. The vest was not Daniel Dawson's. Or rather, it had not always been his. That afternoon, Evelyn requested access to a long-neglected storage wing rows of boxes that smelled of cardboard and neglect, where personal effects waited for decisions that never came. The archivist handed her a clipboard and shook his head. "Most of this was never cataloged properly," he said. "Families moved on, or couldn't. They found Captain Hap Mercer's effects in a box marked only with his name and rank. Inside, a brass compass, dull with handling. a deck of cards missing two kings, a bundle of letters tied with twine, and beneath them, an envelope, white, unopened. The paper around the seal yellowed, but intact. Evelyn's breath caught. She knew before she turned it over. If I don't land, the handwriting matched Daniel Dawson's steady, careful, the letters spaced as if order itself might protect them. This was never delivered, the archivist said quietly. Evelyn nodded. She held the envelope like it might bruise. They opened it together, the archivist's gloved hands steady, respectful. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. One sentence. If they offer me a trade, don't take it. Evelyn stared at the words until they blurred. A trade. Her mind ran through possibilities, prisoner exchange, propaganda, leverage. None of them fit neatly. None of them were small. She imagined Daniel writing it, alone in his hut, the rain ticking on canvas. Imagined him deciding what to say and what to leave unsaid. Imagined the fear it took to put that sentence on paper. He knew something, Evelyn said softly. The archivist nodded. And someone decided this shouldn't reach the family. That someone had a name. Hap Mercer. Back in her office, Evelyn laid out the pieces. The vest that wasn't quite right. The note written later. The envelope never sent. The map grid that didn't match official reports. A pattern emerged, not of accident, but of management. She listened again to Mercer's wartime correspondence, his voice preserved in letters dictated and typed by others. You don't disappear unless someone wants you to, Mercer had said once, half joking, half afraid. Had he hidden the envelope to protect Daniel? To protect Donald? Or to protect himself from a decision he couldn't undo? Evelyn thought of the fear Mercer carried of writing condolence letters, of watching men vanish and being expected to summarize it cleanly. She didn't excuse him, but she could see him. I can't pretend I know what it feels like to choose between truth and harm when both carry weight. But I've seen what happens when that choice is delayed. The damage doesn't vanish. It just changes hands. Evelyn turned back to the evidence. She overlaid the flight path grid from Daniel's notebook onto modern maps. The official crash site fell short. The grid scribbled in pencil pushed farther east, closer to villages Donald had visited years later, closer to where Colette had written names and crossed one out so hard it tore the paper. Evelyn requested soil and metal samples from previous surveys in that region dismissed at the time as unrelated debris. She compared alloy compositions, corrosion patterns. One fragment, small and warped, matched the aluminum used in Daniel's aircraft batch. Not proof, but pressure. That evening, she drove home in silence, the hum of tires on asphalt steady and grounding. At the dinner table, Mina poked at her food. You look like you're carrying rocks, Mina said. Evelyn smiled faintly. It feels like that. Mina studied her. Did you find him? Evelyn shook her head. I found what people did after he went missing. Mina considered this. Is that worse? Evelyn didn't answer right away. She thought of Donald holding the vest, of Ruth clearing the table, of Mercer sliding the file into storage. Sometimes, she said. Late that night, Evelyn returned to the office. She pinned Daniel's sentence above her desk, the paper now sealed in a protective sleeve. If they offer me a trade, don't take it. She imagined Donald overseas, thin and exhausted, offered an artifact that promised finality. Imagined Mercer receiving word and choosing not to intervene. Imagined Colette writing notes she knew were dangerous. The early assumption, the vest equals closure, had been incomplete. Not a lie. Exactly. A construction. Evelyn updated the case file with a new notation. Possibility of survival post-crash. Possibility of detention. Artifact used to terminate search. She paused, then added a final line. Human decision points identified. Before leaving, she took the brass compass from Mercer's box and turned it over in her hand. The needle still moved, still pointed somewhere with quiet certainty. Evelyn set it back gently. Direction, she knew now, did not guarantee arrival. But it did reveal who had chosen to stop walking. The notebook arrived wrapped in brown paper and hesitation. It was delivered by a man who introduced himself as Julian Emberger, his voice careful, as if names themselves might still be dangerous. He was Colette's nephew. He held the parcel with both hands, fingers tight around the edges, and did not sit until Dr. Evelyn Park invited him to. She didn't talk much about the war, Julian said, but she kept this. The notebook was small, the cover warped from moisture, the spine repaired with thread that did not match. When Evelyn opened it, the pages gave off a faint smell of old ink and dust. Handwriting filled most of them French, English, phonetic attempts at local dialects. Dates, names, observations written quickly, urgently, translations. Colette Emberger had been thorough. Evelyn turned the pages slowly, letting the rhythm of Colette's hand guide her. Some entries were mundane weather, delays, complaints about food. Others tightened her chest. Then she saw the line Julien had warned her about, circled so hard the paper had torn. They said the pilot was buried, but they wouldn't say where. They laughed when he asked again. Evelyn felt the words settle like weight. Laughter, in this context, was not humor. It was power. Julien watched her face. She underlined that one every time she reread it, he said, as if she was afraid it might disappear. Evelyn nodded. Did she ever say who he was? Julien shook his head. Only that he was younger than her, and very tired. And that were why. His erection? Anyone. The pieces shifted. Donald Dawson's journey overseas had long been framed as a brother's desperate search, a civilian pushing against the machinery of war. But the notebook suggested something else, something harder to name. Donald had not just been searching. He had been seen. Evelyn pulled Donald's final recorded interview, the one conducted years before his death. His voice was thinner than in earlier tapes, worn down by repetition and age. "They watched me," Donald said. "Not like a guard. Like a story." Evelyn replayed the line, then another. "I thought if I kept asking, they'd get tired and tell me. Instead, they kept offering things." "What things?" the interviewer asked. Donald hesitated. You could hear him breathe. Proof. The vest. The map. The suggestion of certainty. Each one a way to shape the ending. Evelyn thought of Daniel's sentence again. "If they offer me a trade, don't take it." What if the trade was not freedom for Daniel, but silence for Donald? Colette's notebook contained a list of villages they visited together. One name had been scratched out so aggressively the letters were barely legible. The same village name appeared once more, lightly written, as if Colette had changed her mind and then changed it back. Evelyn overlaid that village with the map grid from the vest. It matched more closely than the official crash site ever had. She leaned back in her chair, hands pressed to her eyes. This was no longer a question of crash dynamics or misidentified gear. This was about fear, how it narrowed choices. Donald's captivity was not formal. There were no bars, no cells. There was food, movement, conversation. And always, the understanding that he was being allowed to continue because he was useful. A bargaining chip, a witness, a warning. He stopped searching because he was afraid, Donald admitted in his final interview. Not of dying, of bringing back nothing again. Evelyn let the tape run until it clicked to an end. "I can't pretend I know what it feels like to be offered comfort with conditions attached. But I've seen how fear rewrites courage, not erasing it, just redirecting it toward survival." She met with Donald's surviving family next, a niece and a grandson, seated across from her in a quiet conference room. The grandson held the edge of the table, knuckles white, while the niece listened with her hands folded in her lap. Evelyn did not begin with conclusions. She began with objects. She placed a photograph of the vest on the table, then the image of the note pinned inside, then a copy of Daniel's sentence, enlarged but untouched. "This is what your uncle never saw," Evelyn said gently, "and what your family was never meant to." The niece closed her eyes. "He blamed himself," she said, "for years, for stopping." Evelyn shook her head. What he did was human. They talked about Ruth Dawson, about the place at the table she'd stopped setting, about how she kept Daniel's room intact long after Donald returned, about how she never fully trusted the vest, even when she accepted it. "She said fabric can lie," the niece recalled softly. "People can't help it." Evelyn returned to the notebook that night, rereading Colette's entries by desk lamp. One passage near the back caught her attention, a small detail she hadn't noticed before. "The pilot liked cinnamon. He said it helped his stomach." Evelyn's breath caught. Daniel Dawson's cinnamon gum. A small joy, a mundane habit, something Colette could not have known unless she had heard it from someone who had survived long enough to speak. The detail changed nothing and everything. She added it to the file with care, noting its source, its fragility, not proof, not certainty. Human truth. The next morning, Evelyn stood before a map covered in pins and string. The scratched-out village name sat at the center now, no longer avoided. She knew what came next. A field search. A risk. Another promise to break with her daughter. Mina's words echoed in her head. Do they become ghosts if nobody finds them? Evelyn picked up her phone and typed a message she'd rehearsed before. I'm going back into the field. I'll call every night. The reply came quickly. Be careful, and bring the truth back. Evelyn looked again at Daniel's sentence, at Colette's torn page, at Donald's face and the photograph eyes, already learning how to let go without surrendering. The central question had shifted. Not what happened, but who decided how much truth was allowed to survive, and what it cost the people who agreed willingly or not to carry that decision for the rest of their lives. The helicopter's blades beat the air into submission, flattening tall grass and sending loose leaves skittering across the clearing. Doctor. Evelyn Park ducked instinctively as she stepped out, the heat pressing in immediately, thick and damp, carrying the smell of wet soil and decaying vegetation. The jungle here did not feel dramatic. It felt patient. She checked the map one more time. Not the official grid, the one printed cleanly in reports and repeated for decades, but the scratched-out village name from Colette Emberger's notebook, now transferred onto a modern overlay in red pencil. Someone had tried to erase this place once. That alone made it important. The search team moved methodically. Boots sank into soft earth. A metal detector swept back and forth, its steady tone occasionally breaking into a sharp chirp that made everyone pause. Sweat ran down Evelyn's spine, soaking her shirt. She wiped her face with the back of her glove and reminded herself to breathe slowly. They found the first object near the edge of a shallow ravine. A fragment of corroded aluminum, no bigger than a hand, its edges curled and jagged. It was lifted carefully, bagged, tagged. Evelyn watched the process with a focus that bordered on reverence. She knew better than to expect completeness. Out here, nothing survived intact. A few yards away, another signal. This time, a melted buckle. The metal warped as if it had been exposed to intense heat and then abandoned to weather. The kind of heat that came fast. Evelyn knelt, ignoring the damp seeping through her pants, and studied the soil beneath it. There was a darker ring in the earth, a ring-shaped stain where metal had rested for decades, leaching into the ground. Not bones, not confirmation, but presence. One of the team members glanced at her. Could be from any crash, he said carefully. Yes, Evelyn replied. It could. They continued until the light shifted, shadows lengthening under the canopy. No complete remains emerged. No intact aircraft section. Only fragments ambiguous, stubborn, refusing to align into a single story. That night, Evelyn sat on a folding chair outside the temporary camp, listening to insects thrum and chirp in overlapping rhythms. She sipped coffee that tasted faintly of smoke and metal from the mug. Sunrise coffee was her small joy, but this was long past sunrise. Still, the ritual mattered. She thought of Daniel Dawson, chewing cinnamon gum before takeoff, tapping his ring twice against a notebook. She thought of Hap Mercer, retyping reports and shaving until his skin burned. She thought of Donald Dawson, counting steps, folding paper until it split, holding a vest that promised an ending he did not fully believe. I can't pretend I know what it feels like to search for remains that refuse to assemble into certainty. But I can see how fragments demand a different kind of courage, the courage to stop asking them to be more than they are. When Evelyn returned stateside, she did not go straight to the archive. She went first to meet Donald's remaining family. A niece and a grown grandson welcomed her into a quiet living room where photographs lined the walls. Daniel in uniform, Donald older and thinner, Ruth Dawson smiling in a way that never quite reached her eyes. Evelyn placed the evidence on the table slowly. Photographs of the aluminum fragment, the melted buckle, the soil analysis showing long-term metal presence, and finally, a copy of the envelope sentence, still stark and spare. If they offer me a trade, don't take it. I don't have certainty, Evelyn said. I have honesty. The grandson leaned forward. Is it enough? Evelyn paused. This was the moment every case came down to, and no training prepared you for it. It's enough to say, no one abandoned him, she said. And no one simply lost him. The niece picked up the copy of the sentence, her fingers tracing the words. "He knew," she said. Not a question. Yes. They talked about what came next. Whether to request a marker, whether to leave the case technically unresolved, whether fragments could carry a name without pretending to be a body. In the end, they chose something small and deliberate. A marker, not a grave. A place to stand. Before she left, the niece brought out an object Evelyn hadn't seen before. Daniel's original ring. The silver worn thin, the cord replaced many times. Ruth had kept it after Donald died, tucked into a drawer with sewing notions. He never wore it again, the niece said, but he never threw it away. Evelyn held the ring briefly, feeling its weight, its smoothness. She handed it back with care. That evening, back in her office, Evelyn updated the final entries. The vest was recatalogued, its description changed with deliberate precision. No longer confirmation. Now context. She added one last note to the case, file a detail uncovered, too late to change outcomes, but not too late to matter. Cinnamon residue identified in oral history account. A small human detail. New, fragile, real. She turned off the desk lamp, leaving the sentence above her desk visible in the dim light. It did not feel like closure. It felt like restraint. Some truths, she understood now, were not meant to end stories. They were meant to stop the wrong ones from continuing. The flight vest no longer sits where it once did. In the archive, its label has been rewritten in careful ink. Not confirmed gear, not final proof. Now it reads, artifact used as proof. A small shift in language. A heavy one. At a modest memorial, Daniel George Dawson's name is read aloud with others lost that year. The cadence is steady, practiced. When it ends, his family adds another name quietly, almost under their breath. Donald Ray Dawson. No speeches follow, just the sound of shoes on gravel, the scrape of a folding chair, a cough held too long. Dr. Evelyn Park stands at the back, hands folded around a folder she doesn't open. On her desk back home, preserved under clear plastic, is one line of handwriting she knows by heart now. If they offer me a trade, don't take it. She thinks of Donald holding the vest, afraid to keep searching. Of Ruth clearing the table and leaving the room unchanged. Of Mercer closing a drawer he would never reopen. I can't pretend I know how it feels to live with an ending you accepted because it was survivable. But I can see what happens when truth arrives late. It doesn't undo the years. It changes how they're carried. The case file is closed. The question is not. Some families were given proof because proof was easier than honesty. Somewhere, there are other vests, other notes, other men whose stories were redirected instead of resolved. What remains is not certainty. What remains is a record that finally refuses to lie.